So here we are checking up on Anomaly Inc. And I should say, for the most part, I do like Anomaly. I don't have an issue with most of his content, even when I vehemently disagree. I do think he tries to be fair in a lot of cases, but in a lot of other cases, he's really been declining and just going crazy and just saying, first, untrue things, and secondly, things with very, very little basis in any evidence, facts, or logic or anything. It's just him going nutsoid. Many MCU fans, he's been going a little apocalyptic that now more women and people of color are given prominent roles. I do agree with him. It's wrong to say that necessarily all these fans are racist or sexist. That could be true, though a lot of them are. There's also an obvious question of whether the story quality has declined, and for the most part, he focused on that. But in one of his latest videos, he goes into the alleged woke issue, and not even 10 minutes in, he already creates a massive contradiction and even really negates a lot of his earlier pretty strong videos on the prequels.
Had plenty of likable, feminine, yet strong female characters. Sure, sometimes they were a damsel in distress, but being a damsel in distress doesn't make a character weak or pathetic. It
A few moments later.
pushed political correctness into one of their movies in Phase 2 was Iron Man 3, where the white male antagonist, Aldrich Killian, was nothing but a worthless, pathetic incel with one of the most pitiful motivations ever. And in addition to that, absolutely disrespected the shit out of Iron Man's source material and his arch nemesis, who was supposed to be the Mandarin and not this freak.
My name's Trevor Slattery.
I am the Mandarin!
On top of that, they couldn't even let Iron Man defeat his own pathetic villain. They had Pepper Potts, who was injected with that bullshit plot device serum, and who had no combat experience. They had her survive a fatal fall and come back to destroy his villain with ease. It's worth a piece of garbage I've ever seen. And here's 3 hours for those of you who are curious as to why that is. But the biggest problem this series has, other than actively ignoring and shitting on the source material, is the fact that it's supposed to follow the story of Master Chief, the actual main character. For those of you following along, care to take a guess as to what the series is actually about? Well, it's about this Asian bitch who no one's ever fucking heard of, has no fucking place in the Halo lore, was invented solely for this fucking abortion of a show.
Well, I agree. You can definitely have a beautiful woman be, quote, a damsel in distress. That's still not a bad character. So, not every character who's a female needs to be, quote, active or jumping around or doing kung fu, part of action scenes. Female characters can exist in a continuum where they are more passive or more active. It depends a lot on the performance, the script, the director, the style, tone, genre. That's one problem that I have with Anomaly and the EFAP school of thinking is that they seem to think they have a checklist, and if you don't meet the checklist, well, bad movie according to Rags. So anime bad because Rags says so. You're like, okay, well that's nice. You haven't said anything. And here he really says absolutely nothing because it's an insane and just ridiculous standard. He says, oh yeah, some of the MCU females were damsels in distress, but I'm okay with that. Okay, that's fine. And then he says, yeah, the problem with Iron Man 3 is they made Tony a damsel in distress. Well, if you're being consistent, that's not necessarily going to make it a bad film. Now, I agree, Iron Man 3 is a bad film. He even provides valid reasons why it's bad, but he also provides a lot of invalid reasons. In fact, the reasons he gives are pretty racist and sexist and stupid. He honestly says that Iron Man 3 is anti white and demonizes white people. Now, I'm sure if we actually do look at some quote big budget films, they do that. Again, given that they need to literally appeal to a white audience to make money, that's not going to happen too often. I mean, even in the controversial case of the Batman, this is how incredible it's gone. Robot Head, who I've had mostly issues with in his reviews, and 90% of his content I really don't like, and he hates the prequels too, for very bad reasons, by the way. He did a pretty even handed review of the Batman. And Anomaly Inc. also did a very decent review, and I think they handled the issue pretty well. But I got to be honest, Robothead was pretty clear and clever in his analysis, saying, well, that line, which is causing a lot of controversy, can be taken a lot of different ways. It's not necessarily demonizing the white man, and yet there it's explicitly about white privilege. I don't think Iron Man 3 is about white privilege. I mean, it has Elon Musk in a cameo role. What are you talking about? And according to you, it's okay to be a damsel in distress. So it's not okay to be a damsel if the damsel's a male? Why would that matter? Especially if Iron Man 3, especially with Gwyneth Paltrow. Gwyneth Paltrow is extremely sexy. She's very athletic. She looks like she could beat up a man. Have you seen her? She just works out all the time. She's a health guru. You may not like her advice, but is it credible that she stays very muscular and toned? Yeah. Was the plot device weak? Well, maybe, but they did give you a device, so you can't have it both ways. You're saying with Ray, she's a really bad character. They don't explain the abilities or the powers. You don't explain the force. They've never really explained the Force. They never have. Even in the first film, it's very vague. It's just the Force is a mystical thing that does a mystical thingy. I don't have a problem with that. They had a lot of problems with the first film. Lucas is not a great writer. There are a lot of problems with the first film. You just take for granted, like, yeah, the Force is kind of silly, but it's going to serve its purposes for the story. The story itself is okay. It gets where it needs to go, and that's the end of the question. If you want to keep probing it, you can. You're just going to end up nowhere. It's like, yeah, the Force is very, very vague. The plot in Iron Man 3 is radically vague. Things do just happen. So there's many reasons to think, if you're being at least consistent, that it's the beginning of the decline of the MCU. But you don't want to stake the claim that, Iron Man 3, it really sent alarm bells because, Tony, he's a damsel in distress. Like, Tony is a damsel in distress in what, like 10% of the content he's in? He's almost always the alpha dog. It's not a very good reading of his films or RDJ and his contributions to the MCU, or even, frankly, where he ended up with Endgame, which was this massive heroic moment which didn't make any sense and was really stupid and is just silly and laughable, but I guess most fans like it. And it's fine to go against the fans and say they're a bunch of silly MCU fanatics, but I think you want to do better than an insanely self contradictory standard about damsels in distress. But this video overall is decent. I'm going to do more work on it, but it is definitely a sign that Anomaly has very much declined from his early days.
But fanatics don't deal in logic, only their precious fee-fees. Had plenty of likable, feminine, yet strong female characters. Sure, sometimes they were a damsel in distress, but being a damsel in distress doesn't make a character weak or pathetic. It's that they couldn't even let Iron Man defeat his own pathetic villain. They had Pepper Potts, who was injected with that bullshit plot device serum, and who had no combat experience. They had her survive a
You serious?